La brújula sonó como un monstruo esa noche, sus clavos rompiendo contra las paredes de Eli Turner's Lonely Ranch House. Adentro, el fuego en la orilla de la piedra se quemó bajo sus emberas, pulsando rojo baranco, retomando el frío que cepaba a través de las ruedas. Eli se sentó en la mesa del cocino. Las espaldas se rompieron, las manos calizadas. Se arrastraron alrededor de un vaso de café caliente. Afuera, el viento gritaba y el mundo era nada más que blanco, una gran mercilesa de nieve quemando las playas de Dakota. Luego vino el sonido que no pertenecía, un toque suave, tembloroso y casi quemado por la tormenta. Eli se congeló su mano, abriéndose alrededor del vaso. En esta hora, la hora más oscura del invierno, nadie debería estar en esta tierra. Bandidos, desesperados viajeros. Sus ojos se abrieron mientras estaba los viejos paredes creciéndose debajo de sus zapatos. Llegó a la pistola apuntada contra la pared, antes de deslizar la puerta de madera pesada. El viento la rompió hirviendo el nieve por dentro. Y ahí estaban, 3 figuras pequeñas y tremulosas como sombras cargadas de hielo. El más viejo, una chica de quizás 14 años, estaba agarrando la mano de otro, que agarró una chica con los ojos abiertos. Entre ellas estaba una chica con cabello oscuro, quizás de 10 años. Su cinta medio deslizada, ojos brillantes con miedo, pero fuertes como si se daría la tormenta para romperla. Por un momento Eli solo podía mirar. ¿Quién eres tú?, le pedía su voz roja de horas de silencio. El más viejo se rompió duro. Sus labios se rompieron, pero su voz, aunque tremulosa, se mantuvo firme. Nuestra madre murió esta mañana, dijo ella. Nosotros no tenemos a dónde ir. Las palabras lo golpearon más fuerte que el viento. La garganta de Eli se abrió. Por un momento no vio a 3 extraños, sino sombras de otro tiempo. Marta, su vieja esposa oscura y tranquila, en una cama de hojas de sangre. El silencio que seguía su muerte había sido más fuerte que cualquier brújula. No deberías estar aquí, se murmuró, aunque las palabras se volvieron más suaves que lo que quería. Te vas a congelar. La chica media, la que tenía el cabello oscuro, miró a él sin mirar. Nos dijo que te buscara. Dijo que te ayudaría. ¿Quién te dijo eso? Nuestra mamá, dijo la más vieja, levantando su cintura como si la verdad fuera su escudo. Dijo que tu nombre era Eli Turner y que tú sabías qué hacer. La mano de Eli se cayó del arma. Sentía el nombre presionando contra su pecho como una piedra. Vengan adentro, dijo avanzando. La calidez de la casa de hojas los golpeó como un abrazo, aunque era poco más que un fuego obstinado, luchando una batalla perdida. Eli movióse a la mesa. Sienta. Te ves medio congelado. El más viejo guió a los 2 jóvenes a la mesa. Sus ropas eran finas, secas, con nieve derretida, sus cabellos oscuros, como agua. El más joven, 5 al menos, se acercó al perro como si fuera su corazón. ¿Cuál es tu nombre?, preguntó Eli. Sophie, respondió la más vieja. Esta es Lea y esa es Rosie. Llegó a las espaldas de su cinta y sacó una pequeña parcela de plástico. Mamá nos dijo que te la diera. Dijo si algo sucediera entenderías. Eli tomó la parcela con manos que de repente no se sentían como su propia. El hilo que la atazó era azul, exactamente como el hilo que Marta usaba para tejer. Una calma salió a través de él, más fría que la tormenta. ¿Cuál es tu nombre, mamá?, le preguntó, aunque su cuello ya se había roto con la respuesta. Isabel Vega, dijo Sophie. El nombre se cayó como un martillo entre ellos. Isabel. Un nombre que Eli no había hablado en años, no desde que escogió a Marta en lugar. Isabel había sido el fuego de su juventud, la chica con la risa y el espíritu obstinado. Él pensaba que se había mudado igual que lo intentaba, ocultando su corazón, tras años de trabajo y sufrimiento. Pero ahora su nombre ha vuelto cargado en el nieve y llevado por 3 chicas sin madre. Eli abrió el hilo en la parcela. Adentro había una carta folgada atascada con un hilo desvanecido y un pequeño anillo de silver atascado con una flor. Su pecho se abrió mientras miraba a la escritura, elegante, familiar. Ellie, si estás leyendo esto me voy. Él no leyó más. Aún no. Las chicas necesitaban calidez, comida, seguridad. Él forzó su mente a volver al presente. Ustedes tres necesitan ropa seca, dijo él, estando abruptamente. Hay zapatos en la habitación de atrás. Salgan de esas cosas húmedas o te atraparás a la muerte. Sophie hesitó mirando a sus hermanas, pero algo en el tono de Ellie, una fuerza firme y sin resistencia, hizo que ella grite. Le guió a Lea y a Rosie hacia la habitación de atrás, el sonido de sus pequeños pasos, sonando como fantasmas, a través de la casa tranquila. Ellie se sentó en su silla. La carta se sentaba en sus manos. Su dedo trazó la cinta una vez antes de abrirla. Ellie empezó. Si estás leyendo esto, no lo hice. No tenía a nadie más a confiar. Nadie más creí que mantuviera su palabra. Ustedes me prometieron al lado de la casa de Marta que ofrecieran alquiler a cualquiera que no tenía dónde ir. Estas son mis hijas, Sophie valiente y firme, Rosie la luz de mis días, y Lea. El aliento de Ellie se atrapó mientras sus ojos se movían a la siguiente línea. Lea es tu hija. El fuego se empujó rompiendo espaldas a la habitación oscura. La visión de Ellie se desvaneció. Las palabras se rompían en una oscuridad de desconfianza. Tu hija. Se miró hacia la salida donde las chicas estaban cambiando y un extraño dolor se rompió a través de su pecho. Lea, su hija. Unos 40 preguntas se rompieron a través de su mente. ¿Por qué no me dijo cómo no lo hubiera sabido? Pero las respuestas se habían ido con el nieve que ahora cubría la voz de Isabel. Todo lo que quedaba eran las 3 chicas y una promesa que no había realizado que había hecho. A la hora en que Sophie y Lea regresaron con zapatos tapados como ropas, Ellie había empujado la carta a su bolso. Rosie agarró un vaso de leche caliente que había agarrado para ella. «Puedes quedarte aquí por ahora», le dijo. Su tono gris pero firme. «Voy a descubrir cosas». «Gracias», le dijo Sophie. Su mirada firme a pesar de la roja en sus ojos. Ellie miró a Lea. Le miró de vuelta con una mirada demasiado estrecha para su edad, como si intentara leer algo en su rostro, una verdad que aún no sabía. Le miró a su bolso. Le miró de vuelta con una mirada demasiado estrecha para su edad, como si intentara en su rostro que aún no sabía. Como si intentara leer algo en su rostro. Le miró de vuelta con una mirada demasiado estrecha para su edad, como si intentara. Le miró como si intentara, como si intentara. Le miró de vuelta, con una mirada como si intentara en su rostro. Le miró Lea Rold. Le miró como si intentara leer algo que aún no sabía. The storm had settled by morning, leaving the plains wrapped in a harsh crystalline silence. The air was so cold, it burned the lungs, and the horizon shimmered with an unforgiving brightness. Eli Turner rose before the sun, as he always did, but the rhythm of his morning felt strange, with 3 girls sleeping in his home. They were huddled together near the hearth. Sophie's arm draped protectively over her sister's, their small breaths rising and falling, like a fragile chorus. Eli moved quietly, feeding the stove another log, before stepping into his boots. He slipped outside the snow, crunching beneath his weight. The barn loomed dark against the pale expanse, its roof dusted white. He unlatched the door and was met by the warm, earthy smell of hay and livestock. The horses shuffled, and the cows stirred as he filled their troughs with water chipped from ice. The work normally, a welcome distraction, felt heavy. His mind kept drifting back to the letter in his coat pocket. When he returned, Sophie was awake, her dark hair tangled from sleep, but her eyes sharp and watchful. "Do you always get up this early?" she asked, her voice still rough from the cold night. "Always," Eli replied, setting his hat on the table. Cattle don't care if a man's tired. Sophie rose carefully, not to disturb Leah or Rosie. "We can help," she said, as if afraid he might refuse. Eli studied her for a moment. She had Isabel's determination, that quiet strength that didn't need words to announce itself. "There'll be time for that," he said. "But first, you all need something hot in your stomachs." He fetched flour, a bit of lard, and the last of the eggs, mixing them with a sure hand. Soon the smell of biscuits baking filled the small kitchen. When Leah woke, her first instinct was to look around, clutching the one-eyed doll. She blinked at Eli, uncertain. Rosie stumbled over and climbed onto Sophie's lap. Eli placed 3 tin plates of biscuits and scrambled eggs on the table. "Eat," he said, softer than his usual tone. "There's more if you finish that." Rosie's eyes widened at the sight of warm food. "Thank you, Mr. Turner," she whispered. "Just Eli," he corrected, before sitting across from them. He noticed Leah's gaze steady, almost questioning, and felt a pang deep in his chest. After breakfast, when the girls were wrapped in borrowed coats exploring the yard, Eli pulled out the letter again. He read it slowly, every word digging deeper. "Eli, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I didn't have time to find anyone else. You once promised that you'd offer shelter to anyone who needed it. I know you never meant me, but I believe you'll do right by them. Sophie is strong, but she is still just a girl. Rosie is only 5, too young to understand. And Leah," his eyes stopped on the next line, "Leah is yours." The weight of those words crushed him. Memories of Isabel came unbidden summer evenings by the river, laughter over shared secrets, a kiss stolen beneath the cottonwoods. He had chosen Martha believing it was the path he needed, but part of him had always wondered what might have been. And now Isabel was gone, leaving a piece of him, Leah, on his doorstep. Eli folded the letter, his hands unsteady, and slipped it back into his pocket just as the sound of hooves approached from the frozen road. He stepped outside, rifle at his side. A rider emerged through the brightness, Jacob Miller, his nearest neighbor, with his wool coat buttoned to the chin. "Morning," Jacob called, reining in his horse. "Heard there were strangers on your land." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Word travels fast, not from me," Jacob said. "From Ward. He was in town last night running his mouth. Claims Isabel Vega owed him a debt, says her girls might end up in his care if someone doesn't settle it." The muscles in Eli's jaw tightened. "Ward won't lay a finger on them." Jacob studied him. "I figured you'd say that. But watch yourself, Eli. Ward's not above pushing the law to get what he wants. And with that general store of his, half the town owes him something." Eli glanced toward the barn where the girls were laughing softly, their breath fogging the cold air. "I don't care what Ward wants. They're staying here." Jacob nodded, though his eyes were heavy with worry. "If you need another pair of hands, you know where I am." When Jacob left, Eli felt the knot in his chest tighten. Ward. The name was a thorn he thought he'd removed long ago. If Ward came sniffing around, there would be trouble. But he wouldn't let fear rule him, not with those girls under his roof. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast a cold golden light across the snow, Eli gathered the girls inside. He needed answers. "Tell me," he said, sitting at the table. "How did your mother—" His voice trailed off. Sophie swallowed. She was sick. She couldn't breathe for days. We tried to get help, but she said we had to stay together. When the coughing stopped, we didn't know what to do except find you." Eli looked at Leah, who stared back with quiet defiance. "Do you know why she sent you to me?" "Because you're the man of the promise," Leah said simply. "Mama said you'd keep us safe." The words sank into him like nails. He remembered the graveyard, the promise he'd muttered when Martha was buried, that he'd never turn away anyone who needed help. He hadn't thought anyone had heard, yet Isabel had remembered. That night, while the girls slept, Eli paced the narrow confines of the ranch house. He stopped by the window, staring out at the dark horizon. Ward was out there watching, waiting. And if Ward claimed the girls as payment for Isabel's debt, it would take more than words to stop him. Eli's hand brushed the rifle leaning against the wall. He had buried enough ghosts for one lifetime, but this was not a battle he could avoid. Tomorrow, he would ride into town, find out exactly what Ward thought he was owed, and settle it on his terms. Outside, the cold stars hung low over the plains, and the wind whispered through the empty land. Inside, the fire cracked softly, and the letter in Eli's pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. Tomorrow would bring Ward's shadow. Eli knew it, and this time he wouldn't face it alone. Eli Turner rode into Clearwater the next morning, with the frost still clinging to his coat. The town was quiet, a thin veil of smoke rising from the chimneys, as if even the fires feared the cold. His horse's hooves clopped against the frozen earth, each sound echoing through the still streets. He tied the reins outside the general store and scanned the buildings, noting how the windows framed curious faces. The news of Isabel's death and her daughter's sudden appearance had traveled faster than the wind. Inside the store, the air was warmer, but charged with tension. Clayton Ward stood behind the counter, his black vest buttoned tight, his slick hair combed back like he was preparing for a portrait. Ward's smile was a blade dressed as kindness. Eli Turner. He said, his tone smooth as oil. "I hear you've taken in some strays." Eli's jaw tightened. He removed his gloves and laid them on the counter, his eyes not leaving Ward's. "Those girls are not strays. They're Isabel Vega's daughters. You've got something to say it plain." Ward leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. "Plain enough. Isabel owed me. Last winter, she took flower medicine and tools she couldn't pay for. We had an arrangement." His smile thinned. "Now that she's gone, her girls are the only payment left." Eli's hand curled into a fist. "You'll keep their names out of your mouth if you value your teeth." Ward chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "You think you can stand in the way of what's owed? This isn't charity work, Turner. This is business. The girls can work it off. Cleaning, sewing. Sophie is strong enough to help in my store. Leah too, if she's not too wild. As for the little one..." His words trailed off the implication enough to make Eli's blood boil. "You're not taking them," Eli said flatly. His voice carried the weight of a man who had lost too much already and wasn't willing to lose again. Ward straightened his smile, gone. "Then you'd better find a way to pay their debt, and fast. The town knows they were left with nothing, and I have papers to prove what Isabel owed me." Eli's eyes darkened. "Bring your papers. You'll find I don't scare easy." Ward's expression hardened. "You'll regret crossing me, Turner." Eli turned on his heel and left his boots striking the floor like hammer blows. The winter sun glared off the snow as he mounted his horse, but he barely noticed. He rode out of Clearwater with a storm brewing inside him, his thoughts tangled with rage and the heavy memory of Isabel's letter. Back at the ranch, Sophie was mending one of Leah's scarves by the fire, while Rosie sat nearby, humming softly to herself. Leah, restless, was outside brushing the mare in the barn. When Eli entered, Sophie looked up, reading the anger in his face. "Was it Ward?" she asked quietly. Eli nodded. "He's not giving up. He says your mother owed him more than she could pay." Sophie's hands paused mid-stitch. "Mama always said Ward was a vulture. She had something hidden, something she said would keep us safe if anything happened to her." Eli crouched beside her, his rough features softening. "Do you know where?" "In the cabin," Sophie said after a moment. "Before she got sick, I saw her hide a bundle under the floorboards near the stove. She told me not to touch it, but..." Her eyes filled with determination. "If it can stop Ward, we have to find it." Eli studied her face so young, yet already hardened by loss. We'll go tomorrow, but no one else can know. Ward will come sniffing around soon enough. That evening, as dusk fell, the girls helped Eli with the evening chores. Leah insisted on feeding the horses, and he showed her how to check their hooves for stones. She watched him with quiet intensity, her small hands mimicking his every move. When she slipped and nearly dropped the brush, Eli caught her arm. Their eyes met for a heartbeat too long, and something unspoken passed between them. Blood, recognizing blood. Later by the fire, Rosie fell asleep, curled against Sophie's lap, her thumb tucked into her palm. Leah sat on the rug, staring at the flames. "Mr. Turner," she said suddenly, "why did Mama trust you? Did you know her a long time ago?" Eli froze. "I knew her," he said. After a pause, his voice was low like the crackle of the fire. "We were friends a long time ago." Leah tilted her head, her dark eyes searching his face. "You look sad when you talk about her." "I am," he admitted, and the silence that followed felt both heavy and healing. The next morning, the sky was steel gray, the kind that promised more snow. Eli saddled his horse and hitched another for Sophie. "Stay close to me," he told her, as Leah and Rosie waved from the doorway, bundled in blankets. "We'll be back by nightfall." They rode out toward the woods where Isabel's cabin stood. The path was narrow and covered with snowdrifts, but Sophie's determination never faltered. She reminded him of Isabel's stubborn courage, and it made his chest ache. By midday, they reached the cabin, a small, weather-beaten structure half buried in snow. Eli dismounted, first helping Sophie down. Inside, the air was stale and cold, the silence pressing in on them. He found the loose floorboard near the stove and pried it up with his knife. Beneath it was a bundle wrapped in leather. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a ledger filled with names, amounts, and notes, evidence of Ward's crooked dealings. There was also a folded document, a property deed with Isabel's name. Sophie gasped softly. She wasn't lying. This could stop him. Eli nodded, tucking the papers into his coat. "This changes everything." But before they could leave, the sound of horses outside froze them both. Eli motioned for Sophie to stay quiet. Through the crack in the wall, he saw two of Ward's men dismounting. One carried a rifle slung over his shoulder. "They're here," Eli whispered. The men circled the cabin, their boots crunching on snow. "Ward says the boss might have left something here," one of them said. "Check inside." Eli's grip tightened on his rifle. He looked at Sophie, her eyes wide with fear, but steady. "Stay behind me," he murmured. As the door creaked open, Eli raised his weapon. "This place is mine now," he said coldly. "Take one more step and you'll wish you hadn't." The men hesitated, but the taller one smirked. "You can't keep us from looking. Try me," Eli said, his voice like stone. For a long moment the standoff held. Then one of the men spat into the snow and backed away. "Fine, but Ward's not done with you, Turner. Not by a long shot." Eli waited until their hoofbeats faded before lowering his rifle. His breath came slow, controlled. "We need to get back before dark," he told Sophie. As they rode home, the weight of the papers in his coat felt like both a shield and a burden. He knew Ward wouldn't stop. And in Clearwater, Ward's lies were already spreading like wildfire. By the time they reached the ranch, the first flakes of snow had begun to fall again. Eli glanced at the girls huddled by the fire and felt the storm gathering not just in the sky, but in the days ahead. The storm that started as they rode back from Isabel's cabin deepened overnight, blanketing the plains with a fresh layer of white. The wind howled through the eaves, but inside the ranch house, the fire burned strong. Eli Turner laid the bundle of papers and the property deed on the table, his eyes fixed on the neat lines of Isabel's handwriting in the ledger. Each entry was a knife pointing at Clayton Ward, evidence of overcharged supplies, false debts, and threats against widows who couldn't pay. If the town saw these pages, Ward's grip would weaken, but Ward would never let them surface without a fight. Sophie sat opposite him, her hands folded tightly. "Will those papers really help?" she asked, her voice thin with worry. "They will if we use them right," Eli replied, "but they also make us targets. Ward will know we have them. He'll come back." Sophie glanced toward the hearth, where Leah and Rosie were playing with wooden blocks Eli had carved years ago. "Mama always said Ward would take whatever he wanted if no one stopped him," Sophie murmured. She tried to fight him alone. Eli's gaze softened. "She's not alone anymore. None of you are." Later that day, Jacob Miller stopped by, shaking snow from his coat as he stepped inside. "The talk in Clearwater's turning ugly," he warned. "Ward's telling folks you're holding the girls for ransom, saying Isabel left debt so heavy, you're trying to take her land." Eli's jaw tightened. He can talk all he wants. "I have proof." Jacob eyed the bundle on the table. "If Ward gets wind of what you found, he'll come with more than just words. You need allies, Eli people, who'll stand with you when this gets messy." "I've been alone for a long time," Eli said. "But for this, I'll take all the help I can get." Jacob nodded. Abigail Moore's got some sway with the townsfolk, and Henry Fowler knows his way around a telegraph. If anyone can get word out before Ward twists the story, it's them. Eli's mind was already turning. "I'll ride into town tomorrow. Talk to them both. Ward can't own the truth if the whole valley sees what he's done." As night settled in, Sophie helped Leah and Rosie into bed. When she returned to the kitchen, Eli was still seated at the table, the ledger open in front of him. The firelight cast sharp lines across his face. "You should rest," Sophie said. "I will," he murmured. But his eyes remained on the pages, as though Isabel's voice still whispered there. The next morning, Eli saddled his horse before dawn, tucking the ledger safely beneath his coat. Sophie insisted on coming. "If this is about Mama," she said, "I want to see it through." Eli hesitated, but saw the determination in her face. "Stay close to me, no matter what happens." They reached Clearwater, just as the sun was rising pale and cold. The town felt tense, as if waiting for something to break. People glanced at them as they passed, whispers, following like shadows. Eli dismounted outside the schoolhouse, where Abigail Moore taught. She met them at the door, her sharp eyes scanning the street before ushering them inside. "You've stirred a hornet's nest," Eli Abigail said, her voice low but steady. "Ward's been spreading lies all week. He says those girls are rightfully his until the debt's paid." "He's a liar," Eli growled, laying the ledger on her desk. "This proves it." Isabel kept records of everything she owed and everything Ward tried to take from her. Abigail flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing. "If this is shown in public, people will see him for what he is, but he won't let it go quietly. That's why I need your help," Eli said. "And Henry's." Abigail nodded. "Go to the telegraph office. Henry's been itching to bring Ward down ever since Ward cheated his father out of supplies last year." With Abigail's promise to speak out, Eli and Sophie crossed to the telegraph office. Henry Fowler, a wiry man with quick hands, leaned against the counter, eyes narrowing when he saw the ledger. "Ward's finished if this gets out," he said, thumbing through the pages. "I can wire copies to the next town. Dry Creek's newspaper would print this in a heartbeat." "Do it," Eli said. "Ward can't bully a whole valley." But even as Henry prepared the telegram, the sound of hooves thundered outside. Clayton Ward himself stepped into the doorway, flanked by two rough-looking men. His smile was a mockery. "Well, well, Turner and his little companions. Looks like you've been snooping where you don't belong." Sophie stiffened. Eli stepped forward, his stance unyielding. "We're not afraid of you, Ward." Ward's eyes narrowed. "You should be. I know what you took from Isabel's cabin. Those papers don't belong to you. They belong to the truth," Eli snapped. Ward's grin vanished. "If you don't hand them over, I'll take them, and I'll make sure those girls are seen as thieves just like their mother." Something in Eli broke then. He stepped closer, his voice like cold steel. "Say one more word about Isabel, and I'll put you in the dirt myself." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke. Ward's men shifted uneasily, but Ward held up a hand. "Fine," he said with mock civility. "Keep your papers. I'll see you on Sunday, Turner. At church. Let's see who the town believes." With that, he left, but his parting look promised more trouble. Eli exhaled slowly, his hand brushing the ledger, as if to assure himself it was still there. Henry locked the door behind Ward. "You've made yourself a target now," Henry said. "Then we'd better aim higher," Eli replied. He turned to Sophie, who met his gaze with the same fire he saw in Isabel's eyes. "We're not backing down." That evening back at the ranch, Eli gathered the girls. "We're going to fight Ward," he said. "But it's not just about us. It's about everyone he's cheated. We need to be ready." Sophie's chin lifted. "Mama would want that." Leah, sitting close to Rosie, asked quietly, "What if he comes here?" Eli's voice softened, though his eyes were hard. "Then he'll find out this house doesn't scare easy." The wind outside carried the promise of another storm, but this time, Eli felt ready. In the days ahead, he would have to rally the town stand before them with Isabel's ledger and face Ward's venom head-on. And when that day came, there would be no turning back. The morning after Ward's visit, Clearwater felt like a town holding its breath. Eli Turner could feel it in the way people stared as he rode through the main street, Sophie riding behind him on his second horse. Whispers trailed them like smoke curling out of the saloon, the barber's shop, and the general store, where Ward's shadow always seemed to linger. Some folks nodded respectfully, while others looked away uncertain whether Eli was a man to trust or a troublemaker. Ward's lies had worked their poison overnight. Eli stopped at the schoolhouse first. Abigail Moore was outside sweeping snow from the steps, her stern face softening when she saw him. "You're causing more talk than a summer storm," she said, leaning on her broom. "Ward's telling everyone that you're trying to steal Isabel's land through those girls." "Then it's time the truth came out," Eli replied. He dismounted and handed Sophie the reins. "I need you and Henry to stand with me on Sunday. We'll show the town Isabel's ledger. Once folks see what Ward has been doing, they'll know who the real thief is." Abigail's gaze was sharp and steady. "Ward won't go quietly, Eli. He has friends in the church pews, men who have taken his credit and won't want their names dragged through the dirt." "I'm not looking to shame anyone but him," Eli said. "But if they keep siding with him, they'll fall with him. I'll face whatever comes, but I won't see those girls treated like pawns." Abigail studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "I'll speak up. People trust me. They might listen." As they left the schoolhouse, Sophie walked beside Eli. Her cheeks flushed from the cold, and something more fear mixed with determination. "What if Ward tries to hurt us?" she asked quietly. Eli glanced down at her. "Then he'll learn I'm not a man who backs down, and neither was your mother." "That's something we share." They made their way to the telegraph office. Henry Fowler was already waiting inside. His sleeves rolled the clack of the telegraph key filling the small room. He looked up when Eli entered his wiry frame, straightening with purpose. "I've already sent copies of Isabel's ledger to Dry Creek," he said. "The newspaper editor there owes me a favor. He'll print the story next week," Good Eli said. "We'll need the town to see it with their own eyes." Henry rubbed his chin, frowning. "Ward knows I'm helping you. He's already sent 2 of his men to warn me off. I don't scare easy, but you'd better be ready for him to get mean." Eli's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "Let him try. He'll find out I don't scare easy either." That afternoon, back at the ranch, Eli gathered the girls. Leah and Rosie sat cross-legged on the rug near the fire, while Sophie listened with arms folded. Ward's going to push harder now, Eli told them. But we've got something he doesn't prove, and people who care. I want you three to stay close to the house until this is settled. No wandering near the road. Leah's dark eyes met his. Will you be safe? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli paused the question, cutting through his chest. I'll be as safe as I need to be, he said gently. I've got more to protect now than just this ranch. That night, as the girls slept, Eli stayed by the fire with the ledger open in front of him. He traced Isabel's handwriting, remembering the warmth of her laughter and the stubborn tilt of her chin. He wondered if she had known in her final days that her words would become the weapon he needed to fight for her daughters. The next day, Jacob Miller rode in with news. Ward's telling everyone he's going to speak at church on Sunday. Say you're hiding those girls for your own gain, Jacob said, his face lined with concern. You'd better be ready to answer him. Eli's hand tightened on the fence rail where he was mending a broken plank. Then I'll answer him, he said in front of everyone. Abigail and Henry are with you, Jacob added, and so am I. Ward scared Eli. That's why he's running his mouth. Men like him only shout when they're cornered. Eli nodded, but his mind was already moving ahead. Sunday would be the day the truth came out, or the day Ward made his boldest move yet. Later that evening, as the sky turned a bruised purple, Eli stood on the porch, watching the girls chase each other through the snow. Rosie's laughter rang out like bells, while Sophie, trying to be serious, couldn't help but smile. Leah paused to look at him, her expression thoughtful, almost searching. It was in moments like these that Eli felt the weight of Isabel's trust settle on his shoulders like armor. Inside over supper, Sophie asked, "What will happen after Sunday?" "If Ward doesn't back down, then we keep fighting," Eli said simply. "But if the town stands with us, he won't have anywhere to hide." Leah tilted her head. "Mama said the town was too afraid of him." "Fear only lasts as long as no one stands up," Eli said. "We'll give them a reason to stand." The days leading up to Sunday were tense. Eli spent every spare moment preparing. He copied key pages from Isabel's ledger, marking the most damning entries. He visited Abigail again, who promised to speak before the congregation. Henry, ever eager, said he would bring a telegraph copy of the message he'd sent to Dry Creek, proof that outside eyes were already watching. On Saturday night, a new storm rolled in wind, rattling the shutters. As Eli secured the barn doors, he felt a prickle at the back of his neck. He turned just in time to see a lone rider on the ridge, watching. The rider wore a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, and though the distance made it hard to see his face, Eli knew it wasn't Ward. The man turned his horse and rode off without a word. When Eli returned to the house, Sophie noticed his frown. "Is something wrong?" "Just a feeling," he said. "Someone's watching us." She swallowed. "Ward maybe, or maybe someone worse." That night, Eli barely slept. He sat at the table with the ledger, a loaded rifle leaning against the wall. Every creak of the wind made him think of Isabel's girls sleeping upstairs, and how much they depended on him now. By morning, the snow had stopped, but the sky was heavy with clouds. Tomorrow was Sunday. Tomorrow, everything would change, one way or another. Eli stoked the fire and looked at Sophie Lee and Rosie as they ate breakfast. "Tomorrow we go to town," he said. "We'll tell the truth where everyone can hear it. No more hiding." Sophie's gaze was steady. "Mama would want that." Eli nodded, feeling the fire of determination settle deep in his chest. Tomorrow's confrontation would be the turning point, and if Ward wanted a fight, he'd get one. The church bell rang out across Clearwater just before noon, solemn and clear in the brittle winter air. Snow crunched under the boots of townsfolk as they filed into the wooden chapel. Families bundled tight, voices hushed. They came with ears full of rumors and eyes darting for truth. Clayton Ward had been stirring the pot all week, promising to reveal Eli Turner as a schemer and thief. But whispers had started moving in the other direction too. Whispers about debt ledgers, buried secrets, and a man finally taking a stand. Eli stood outside the church with Sophie beside him, her coat patched at the elbows, but her shoulders squared like armor. Leah and Rosie waited with Abigail Moore and Jacob Miller near the back steps. Henry Fowler paced the walkway, a yellowed telegram from Dry Creek clutched in his hand. "You ready?" Abigail asked Eli quietly. "As I'll ever be," he replied, fingers tightening around the worn folder holding Isabel's ledger. They entered together, the room turning quiet as soon as the doors opened. Ward was already inside, seated at the front pew, like a man claiming the space as his own. He turned his smile, slicing through the room like a knife. "Well, if it isn't the Savior himself," he said under his breath. "Hope you brought something more than good intentions." Eli said nothing. He walked straight down the aisle with Sophie and handed the folder to Father McKinley, the grizzled old preacher who'd married him and Martha years ago. The service began as usual, hymns sung with cracked voices, prayers recited by memory. But when Father McKinley closed his Bible and cleared his throat, everyone leaned in. "Before we go, there's a matter that concerns this community," he said, his voice worn but firm. "Mr. Ward has made accusations. Mr. Turner has brought evidence." The hush deepened. Ward crossed his arms, confident. Eli stepped forward. "I'm not here to start a war." He began, his voice calm but steady. "I'm here because Isabel Vega, a woman this town abandoned when she got sick, died owing more than just a bill. She died owing the truth." He opened the ledger. "This book is Isabel's record of every transaction she had with Ward's store. You'll see the numbers don't match the invoices he sent. You'll see goods priced 3 times higher than anywhere else in Dakota Territory. And you'll see threats made when she couldn't pay." People shifted in the pews, some lowered their eyes, others stared straight at Ward. "She wrote it all down," Eli continued. "She wrote it not just for herself, but for her daughters, for Sophie, Leah, and Rosie. Because she knew one day someone would try to take them, and she hoped someone else would stop it." Ward stood. "This is slander," he barked. "You can't prove she wrote that. Anyone could have scribbled numbers in a book." Eli pulled another slip from his coat. "This telegram is from Dry Creek's newspaper. They've seen copies. They're printing an investigation. That'll reach federal eyes if it has to." Gasps rippled through the church. "You lied to this town," Abigail said, stepping forward. "You preyed on the sick, the desperate, and the silent. Well, silence ends today." Ward's face flushed, his fists clenched. "You think anyone will believe a rancher and a school marm over me? I own half this town's credit. And that's the problem." Jacob growled from the back. "You think debt makes you a king." Henry held up the telegram. "There's more coming, Ward. Names, numbers. You won't bully your way out this time." Ward's voice dropped to a hiss. "This isn't over Turner." "No," Eli said, meeting his eyes. "It's just beginning." Then from the back of the church, a new voice rose. "He's right." Heads turned. A man stepped forward from the last pew, tall, lean, in a gray coat with silver trim and a wide-brimmed hat. His presence seemed to pull the light from the room. "I've heard enough," the man said, voice smooth like whiskey over ice. "And I think it's time everyone here knows who really wants that land." Ward looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Mr. Halen, I didn't expect..." Charles Halen removed his gloves, slowly surveying the crowd. "No, I don't suppose you did. You told me you had things under control, that Isabel Vega's land would come quietly, that no one would stand in your way." He turned to Eli. "I funded Ward's operations. That ledger was supposed to stay buried." Eli stepped in front of Sophie instinctively. "Then you're part of this too." Was Halen said gaze unreadable. but I don't buy damaged goods. Ward lied to me, and lies are expensive, he faced the church. I don't care for morality speeches. I care for water rights, shipping routes, and silent transactions. But it appears this valley has grown a spine. He looked back at Eli. Enjoy your land while you can. Not all storms come with thunder. With that, Halen turned and walked out, the sound of his boots echoing against the wooden floor. Ward remained frozen, jaw clenched, breath shallow. But the room had already turned against him. One by one, the townsfolk stood not in anger, but in quiet resolve. A collective rejection. Father McKinley closed the Bible slowly. I think that concludes today's sermon. After the service, as folks milled outside, no one approached Ward. He walked alone to his horse, then rode out without a word. Eli stood with the girls beside him. Abigail joined them, her gloved hand resting briefly on his arm. "You did it," she said. "No," Eli replied, watching Leah chase Rosie through the snow. "We all did." But even as the town turned its back on Ward, Eli knew better than to believe the worst was over. Charles Halen wasn't a man who walked away from what he wanted. And now the game had moved beyond debts and ledgers. It had become something much more dangerous. Back at the ranch that evening, Eli packed the ledger into a strong box and placed it beneath a floorboard in the back room. He oiled the shotgun and checked the locks on the barn. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew Halen would come again. Not with words, not with witnesses. And next time, Eli might have to do more than just speak the truth. The snow had melted just enough to reveal the hard earth beneath, but the air carried a tension thicker than any storm. For 3 days after the church showdown, Clayton Ward was nowhere to be seen. That silence unsettled Eli Turner more than Ward's shouting ever had. Men like Ward didn't vanish. They waited coiled like rattlesnakes. Worse, Charles Halen's cold words still lingered in Eli's mind, a promise of trouble yet to come. On the 4th morning, Jacob Miller rode hard to the ranch, his horse lathered with sweat despite the cold. "They're moving on you," he said, swinging down from his saddle before the dust settled. "Halen's men. I followed them near the creek bed last night. They're digging trenches to reroute the water that feeds your ranch." Eli's face hardened. "If they cut off that stream, the cattle won't last through spring." Jacob nodded grimly. "And once your ranch is dry, you'll have no choice but to sell right into Halen's hands." Sophie, who'd been feeding the chickens, overheard and ran to the porch. "What does that mean? Is he trying to take our home?" Her voice trembled, but her chin stayed firm. Eli looked at her, feeling the weight of Isabel's letter like a stone in his chest. "He's trying," Eli said, "but I won't let him." That evening, after the chores were done, Eli gathered everyone inside the warm glow of the firelight. Abigail Moore had come by after hearing Jacob's warning, and Henry Fowler was there too, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "We can't let this stand," Abigail said. "Halen may have money, but he doesn't own the soul of this town." Henry leaned forward. "We've got enough good men to stop them if we act fast. I can wire a message to Dry Creek and neighboring ranches. Folks don't take kindly to someone trying to steal water." Sophie sat close to the fire, holding Rosie in her lap, while Leah leaned against Eli's knee. "Can we fight them?" Leah asked, her dark eyes searching his face. Eli rested a hand on her shoulder. "We'll fight them if we have to. But first, we'll make sure they know we're not alone." The next day, Eli rode out with Jacob to scout Halen's camp. They kept low moving through the snow-dusted pines until they saw it, a group of 5 men digging through the frozen earth, their shovels striking like dull hammers. A wagon with barrels of water stood nearby, along with 2 horses wearing Halen's brand. "Looks like they're close to cutting off the main branch of the stream," Jacob whispered. Eli studied the scene, jaw tightening. "We'll stop them tonight." When the weather turns, the creek will flood, and they won't have time to start over. By dusk, they returned to the ranch with a plan. Henry had sent out wires calling for help, and by nightfall, 4 other ranchers arrived, men Eli knew by name, but hadn't shared a table with in years. They all came, rifles slung over their backs, ready to stand against Halen's hired hands. As the moon rose, the group moved quietly toward the creek bed. The air was sharp and still, the kind that makes every sound carry. Eli led the way, Sophie insisting on following, though he'd told her to stay behind. "If this is about Mama's land," she said, gripping the reins of her horse, "I'm not hiding." She wouldn't. Reluctantly, he let her stay close, Jacob watching over her. When they reached the creek, the campfires of Halen's men flickered through the trees. Eli motioned for silence, crouching low. "We'll surround them," he whispered. "No shooting unless we have no choice." They stepped out of the dark like shadows made of ice and steel. "Put down the shovels," Eli called. "You're done here." The men froze, one of them swearing under his breath. "Who says the tallest?" sneered, gripping his shovel like a weapon. "I do," Eli said, his rifle steady, but aimed low. "And so does every rancher within 50 miles. You cut off this water, you'll answer for it." The standoff hung heavy in the cold air. Then with a snarl, the tall man lunged. The night erupted into chaos, shovels, clanging boots, pounding fists, swinging. Sophie ducked behind a wagon, heart pounding, as she watched Jacob grapple with 2 men, while Eli took on the tall one. Eli fought with the desperation of a man defending more than land. He ducked, a wild swing drove his shoulder into the man's chest and knocked him flat in the snow. "Tell Halen," he growled, pressing the barrel of his rifle against the man's jaw, "that this creek belongs to everyone who lives here, not to him." The man spat blood, but nodded, fear flashing in his eyes. By the time the fight ended, Halen's men were gone, retreating into the dark. The creek bed, though scarred with trenches, still flowed. Sophie ran to Eli, breathless. "Are you hurt?" He wiped the blood from his lip, shaking his head. "Just a scratch." Henry stepped forward, breathing hard. "This isn't the last we'll see of them. Halen's not the type to lick his wounds." "I know," Eli said, his voice low, "but now he knows we're not afraid." As they rode back to the ranch, the night sky was alive with stars, cold and unyielding. The girls were waiting by the hearth when they returned, and Leah ran straight into Eli's arms, clinging to him like she'd never let go. He held her tight, his heart heavy but steady. He'd won tonight, but the war wasn't over. Later, as the others slept, Eli sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Halen had shown his hand, but men like Halen always had more cards to play. The ranch felt safe for now, but Eli knew safety was fragile. He thought of Isabel, of the promise her letter demanded. He wouldn't break it. Not now, not ever. In the quiet, Sophie came to sit beside him. "You really think he'll come back?" she asked softly. "Yes," Eli admitted, "but next time we'll be ready." She nodded, her eyes glinting with the same stubborn fire her mother had. "Then we'll fight, all of us." Eli looked at her, pride swelling in his chest. "All of us," he echoed. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the distant howl of wolves and the promise of another battle. The final reckoning with Halen was coming, and Eli knew he would have to risk everything, not just the ranch, but the family he was building from the ashes of loss. The storm came 2 days later, not of snow or wind, but of men and greed. Eli Turner spotted them first. Dark shapes moving across the ridge above the creek, Halen's riders, 6 in total, carrying rifles slung low and lanterns swaying in the pre-dawn gloom. The sight sent a chill deeper than winter through Eli's spine. He had known this was coming, but knowing didn't make it easier. He roused Jacob, who had stayed the night in the bunkhouse, and Henry, who was asleep near the fire after spending hours writing letters to neighboring ranchers. "They're here," Eli said, his voice flat but steady. Helen's making his move. Jacob rubbed sleep from his eyes, pulling on his boots. 6 men. Maybe more hiding in the trees. He's not coming for a talk this time. Sophie was already awake, clutching Rosie's hand, while Leah stood stiffly by the door. "We'll help Sophie," said, though her voice trembled. "Mama would want us to stand." "No," Eli said firmly. "You'll stay in the house. Lock the doors. Do not open them for anyone but me or Jacob." He knelt so he could look Leah in the eyes. "Take care of your sisters. That's your part in this fight." Leah nodded, her small chin lifting with quiet courage. Eli and Jacob saddled their horses, just as the first rays of dawn turned the snow pale gold. The creek shimmered in the distance, half frozen but still flowing. Helen's men were already digging again, determined to finish what they'd started. And at their center sat Charles Helen himself, his gray coat buttoned like armor, his face calm and cold. "Helen." Eli's voice rang out as he rode closer, rifle resting across his saddle. "This is your last warning. Get off my land." Helen didn't move. "This isn't your land, Turner. It's land for whoever controls the water, and soon that won't be you." Jacob pulled up beside Eli. "You can't win this, Helen. The whole valley knows what you're trying to do. Even Ward's gone quiet." Helen smirked. "Ward's a fool who couldn't handle simple errands. I'm not Ward. I don't need the town's approval." Eli dismounted, planting his boots firmly in the snow. "Then you'll get something else." His rifle was steady, though he hadn't aimed it yet. "This ranch isn't for sale. And I'll be damned if I let you poison the creek with your greed." Helen signaled to his men, "Take them off this land." The clash was sudden and violent. Jacob fired a warning shot into the air, scattering 2 of the riders. The others advanced, shovels raised like clubs. Eli ducked a swing, his fist connecting with a jaw, sending a man sprawling into the snow. Horses reared hooves, pounding steam, rising from their nostrils in the cold air. From the ridge, a sharp crack of a rifle rang out. One of the attackers dropped his weapon and staggered back. Eli turned to see Henry Fowler on horseback, riding in with 3 other ranchers from the neighboring valley. Reinforcements. Eli's chest tightened with relief. The tide shifted quickly. Helen's men, outnumbered and shaken, began retreating under the barrage of warning shots and shouts. But Helen himself stayed, his face twisted with fury. "This isn't over, Turner," he roared. "You can't hold out forever." Eli stepped forward, the snow crunching beneath his boots. "You're right," he said. "I'm not holding out. I'm building something, and you'll never be part of it." Helen glared at him. But when the other ranchers surrounded him, he knew the battle was lost. He turned his horse sharply and rode off his men, following like shadows scattering at dawn. By midday, the valley was quiet again. Eli, Jacob, and the others filled the trenches Helen's men had dug, reinforcing the natural flow of the creek with rocks and packed snow. Henry clapped Eli on the shoulder. "You did it. Helen won't come back now that he's been humiliated." Eli looked around at the faces of the men who had come to help. "We all did it," he said. "This creek belongs to every rancher who depends on it. No one man should control what gives life." Back at the ranch, the girls waited by the window. When they saw Eli ride in, Leah bolted outside, her boots slipping on the snow as she ran to him. He swung down from his horse and caught her in his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you hurt?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide with worry. "No." Eli said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We're safe now." That evening, the house was warm with laughter and the smell of stew. Abigail arrived with fresh bread, and Jacob brought over a jug of cider. They sat around the table like a family, the weight of the past weeks finally lifting. After dinner, Eli went out to the porch, the night sky glowing with stars. Sophie joined him, her breath misting in the cold. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Eli said slowly, "we make this place a home, not just for me, but for you, Leah and Rosie, if you'll have me." Sophie smiled, her eyes glistening. "We already do." The next morning, Eli rode into Clearwater to settle matters, once and for all. With the help of Abigail and Henry, he filed the paperwork to adopt Sophie, Leah, and Rosie. It was official, he was their father now. Not just in name, but in law and in heart. Weeks later, spring came to the valley, the snow melting into streams that fed the fields. Wildflowers bloomed where the frost had once ruled. Eli built a wooden sign to hang over the ranch gate. It read, "Turner Ranch, a home built on promises kept." On the first warm evening of the season, the girls ran through the pasture, their laughter carrying across the hills. Sophie twirled Rosie by the hands, while Leah chased after a foal. Eli stood by the fence watching them, his heart fuller than it had been in years. He wasn't just a lonely rancher anymore. He was a man with a family, a purpose, and a home worth defending. Jacob approached, leaning on the fence beside him. "You look like a man who's finally got what he's been missing," he said. Eli nodded. "I have." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and rose. For the first time in a long while, Eli felt peace. Not the quiet emptiness he'd known after Martha died, but the deep, steady peace of knowing he'd kept his word and that Isabel's daughters were safe and loved. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together.